All right, welcome back, guys. So now we're gonna move on. I decided to skip one of the sections in the book. I didn't really think it was that important. I talked a tiny bit more about other possible primal emotions, but I want to move on. This is actually, I forgot about this section. So this is the last section in chapter 4, which we're just gonna go over because it is important. So basically, there's something I call an activation phase for when the body charges primal emotions. So basically, just go over this first point. Primal emotions are charged by the body for a fairly short amount of time. So that's called the activation phase. So what I noticed when I was first learning about all of this stuff, and I started with anxiety, was that I would always feel the primal emotion, let's say anxiety, for example, I would always feel it most intensely for a short amount of time. Usually it was like 2 or 3 minutes, and then it would like taper off and get weaker and weaker. You know what I mean? So if I wasn't like charging anxiety myself, then usually anxiety would go away after a couple of minutes and I'd be okay. But that actually brings me to the next point. So the reason you can still feel anxiety for a long period of time, or the danger emotion, or the sexual emotion, is at this next point. So the mind has the ability to keep charging a primal emotion even after the activation phase has ended. This is actually what the body expects. So, and I don't know if I said that, when primal emotions are charged by the body, for that short period of time when they're charged is what I call the activation phase. So, when the body charges the subconscious, right, the body will charge it and the subconscious switches to a particular frequency. Now, once the subconscious is on that frequency, right, it's not that hard for the negative mind or the conscious mind to begin charging it. It might be hard to keep it at the exact same frequency that the body is charged to that, but it still charges it, basically charges the subconscious based on that frequency. So it's going to, whatever frequency the mind does charge is going to be right around that frequency charged by the body. So that's actually what the body expects. It wants to, it actually makes an effort to charge the frequency. It charges it in a burst. So it's really hard to ignore or resist the compulsion for. But once that happens, then the mind will eventually at some point acquiesce or give into the compulsion to think in accordance with that frequency. And then it just starts producing intentions along that frequency. And then the mind starts charging the frequency. And so the body only really charges it very intensely for a short time. Now, just based on my experience, I do get the sense the body is still charging it a little after the activation phase has ended, but it doesn't really do it that much, right? The mind is mostly expected to take over. So going back to my earlier video, when I was experiencing a large amount of anxiety, I would notice that when I would get super anxious at work, right, I would feel a lot of anxiety very intensely, like I said, the activation phase for just about 2 or 3 minutes, then it would go away. In the beginning, that was the end of it, right? But what I kept doing was I kept charging it. I kept charging it. I kept charging it, right? Because I didn't know that the body would respond with the activation phase. I didn't know that the body was when I would do certain things with my intention, the body would switch to the anxiety frequency, make me feel it very intensely to get me to charge it, and then I would go along with it by continuing to charge it. Right, and then once it just kept charging, the emotion and the feeling and the physiological effects, everything just got more and more and more and more intense. Right, so my mind took over, and that's why the charge kept going. Right, even though the body really only does it for a fairly short time. I remember, in the book I talked about this example in the previous section on the danger emotion. I think it was a danger emotion. But I remember when I was younger, right? I watched this movie called The White House Down. You guys probably heard of it. But to me, that movie was amazing, right? That was an awesome movie. It's like watching like one of Arnold Schwarzenegger movies when I was a kid. Yes, I know some people may not have even seen the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, but I'm old enough to remember when like his movies were amazing. Well, they're still amazing, but I watched them when I was younger. But anyway, that movie reminded me of those. It was so amazing. But what I noticed when I was watching the movie, right, I noticed that I felt so much adrenaline when I was watching the movie. It was so intense, and it like wouldn't stop. Like I felt I don't think I've ever watched a movie where I felt more adrenaline. Like continuously the whole time I watched a movie. By the time I got close, I'd probably say about, excuse me, I'd probably say about when it got about 3/4 of the way to the end of the movie, I felt fatigued because I had so much adrenaline and I was releasing so much adrenaline watching the movie that it actually made me tired, right? Now, the body normally wouldn't release that much unless you know you're actually engaged in physical activity. But what happened was my mind took over the charge, right? And it just kept charging the danger frequency or frequency similar to it. And that pretty much kept the physiological response from my body, right, of that frequency, which isn't, like I said, isn't the same as anxiety, but it still kind of can induce an adrenal rush, which feels more exciting and more fun. So, and I knew, I was thinking about it, like, man, this isn't good, right? It was like too much. I've never watched a movie and felt that much adrenaline. But yeah, the mind can take over the charge. Same thing happens sexually. So if you're having sex or whatever, you probably notice that you feel a very strong rush of sexual desire and urges in the beginning of it. And then after a couple minutes, it tapers off a little bit, but you can still keep going, right? So the mind can take over the charge and charge it even more. Now, that actually brings me to the next point. The sexual emotion is a little different because I don't know how it is for women. I don't know how it feels for women. I'm imagining it's a tiny bit different for women. But in men, I know this is true. When men are having sex, right, and we finish, what actually happens, I think this is true. I looked this up. I believe it's true in science, but this is just my experience with controlling the subconscious. The body releases chemical messengers to suppress the body releases chemical messengers to suppress the subconscious, to suppress the subconscious ability to charge the sexual frequency. So I don't know if it's neurotransmitters or hormones, I just say messengers. So what actually happens, and this is interesting, right? And everybody kind of knows this, but it's an interesting way of looking at it from the perspective of this theory in the subconscious. So if I'm charging the sexual emotion, right, which you can do, and it feels really, really amazing when you charge it to really high levels, because your body responds to how much sexual energy how much of the sexual emotion you've charged, or how much the subconscious charges at the sexual frequency. We haven't talked too much about how the subconscious affects the body, but I think we're talking about that at the end of chapter 6. But just know that when you charge sexual energy, it causes a really intense response from the body that feels wonderful, right? So it feels really good. But what happens is, when we finish, the body will release hormones to suppress it. So if the mind keeps trying to charge the sexual emotion, it has a way harder time due to these messengers. The command that these messengers cause the body to give to the subconscious, it tapers off over time, and then you notice your sexual desire starting to rise slowly again until it goes back to normal. But that's, to me, I believe that's like an anti-addiction measure. So it prevents a man from becoming too addicted to sex because it feels so good. The body knows you will become addicted to it if it doesn't do this. So now the mind can try to charge it anyway through that, it's like a dampening effect, through the dampening effect from the body, but it's going to have a hard time because it's clashing with the command of the body, right? It's like trying to go left and right at the same time. So it's always going to be hard. It's way easier to charge a sexual emotion once these chemical messenger, this effect is mostly suppressed. So once it's mostly gone. So when your sexual desire from your body goes back to normal, then you can charge sexual energy normally again. Now, if you charge sexual energy from the mind and allow the body to charge it too when it goes back to normal, that creates the most intense experience, right? But this, you got to be a little careful with, right? Because we'll talk more about in the spirituality section. But, I don't really, I don't want any man watching this to do this with, in YouTube they say corn. I don't know, I guess, it gets regulated or monitored if you say the actual thing. But yeah, if you watch corn and you do this, you charge it like that, it'll feel good, but it's spiritually very, 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 very bad for you if you do that. So don't do that. Now, Why it is, we'll have to wait till we get to the spiritual section in book 2 to talk about that. But I absolutely recommend not to do that. Although it's fine to do it if you're having sex with a woman you love, preferably in marriage. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say. So yeah, that's the end of chapter 4. Next chapter, we're going to talk more. You're going to get the bigger picture of how the negative mind, positive mind dynamic is a little more complicated, but that's the actual way it works. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.